Hello, welcome. As you're joining, we invite you to gather some sketching materials. We will be doing some drawing and sketching, responding to artwork. So please make sure you have some paper and a writing utensil, pencil, pen, any of those will work. And will we be able to get our first slide, please? All right, welcome. Welcome to History is Messy, How We Tell and Remember Stories. Today, we'll be exploring an artwork that looks back through layers of history, bringing new perspective and challenging us to ask questions about how stories are told and remembered. Next slide, please. Quick introduction. My name is Tiffany McGettigan, and I am the head of education at the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden located in Washington, D.C.
My name is Nicole Vance. I'm a student and teacher programs coordinator at the Hirshhorn Museum.
And we're so happy to be here with all of you. We want to thank you for everything you do as teachers and educators. And to those of you who are classroom teachers, thank you for taking time out of your summer vacation to spend learning and giving back to your students. Next slide, please. I'm going to give you just a little bit of background about the Hirshhorn, and then we will jump into our program. The Hirshhorn is the National Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art. Most of the art in our collections and exhibitions has been made within the last century. And many of the artists who we work with are living artists. This means that they are dealing with the issues and the ideas of our times, which makes our work very, very relevant to all of us and to today's students. We think this is especially exciting as students are always wondering, what does this have to do with me and my life? Our work really, really does have to do with our current times. Today, we're going to be exploring an artist who is looking at history through a contemporary lens and using a unique contemporary art making process. All right, and I see we have friends joining us from all around the country. So welcome, we're so thrilled to be sharing this artwork with you today. Next slide, please.
So what to expect today, we'll be with each other for a little over 45 minutes. We're going to be exploring and comparing perspectives, those of contemporary installation, as Tiffany mentioned, but then also looking to a 19th century work, which both can depict perspectives on the Battle of Gettysburg during the American Civil War. We're also going to be looking at and responding to artwork through sketching and writing. And it is our hope that you can incorporate these techniques in your classroom. And just as a reminder, if you're just joining us, you will need paper and pencil or a pen. We're not in the galleries today, just something to write and draw with. And then at the end of the session, we will introduce you to many of our classroom ready resources. So with that, I think we're ready to jump to the next slide. And I'd like to start with this question. I'd like for you to take a few moments to reflect on what it means to you to look through the layers of history. What can you see? What is obscured? And if you'd like to write some responses in the chat, I'm curious to hear what looking through the layers of history means to you. I'll give you a few moments to do that. And as we do, Tiffany, do you have any thoughts on layers of history?
I do. I think it's really interesting when I look back at something that's happened in my own life. Often the things that I remember are very different than the things my family members or my friends, whoever was there with me in that moment, remembers. So I think it's so interesting the different perspectives that we each bring and the things that stand out to us. So I always think it's interesting that so much of history is one person's memory.
Absolutely. When I think of layers of history, I think of also kind of learning, being kind of actively studying history and kind of peeling back those layers, learning more little by little. In the chat, I see some comments talking about different perspectives, various perspectives. The history that is not being told, where the information is found, multiple sources. Oh, it's coming in. There's lots. Yeah, making sense of the past. You through kind of the various hints that we have. Um, these are wonderful responses. Please keep them coming. For the purposes of time, we are going to move to our next slide. And so that you can get a sneak peek of the artwork that we'll be looking at today. And we are looking at an installation currently on view on our third level at the Hirshhorn Museum. And this is a massive, massive work. It fills the entire third floor inner ring of our building. Our building is round. It's a very kind of unique space. This work is by artist Mark Bradford. It's titled Pickett's Charge. And it looks at the American Civil War and how it is in conversation with us today. If you were here at the museum, you would see that this work goes from floor to ceiling. It's monumental. There's 8 of these panels or artworks. And for the purpose of this work, we're going to be looking closely through a variety or a combination of looking strategies. So if we go to the next slide, you can see a few of those on your screen. So for our close looking today, we're going to use a routine called zoom in and zoom out. This is a way to experience new perspectives when looking at an artwork close up and far away. If we're in the gallery, we'd be easily able to do that by moving our bodies. But today we'll be doing that through details and of the artwork. This routine, it works for learners of all ages, from preschool to adult learners as well. We'll be also combining that with another thinking routine called Looking 10 times 2. This is a routine that can be used in the classroom or the galleries, that really aids students in close and careful observations. How this routine works is students will be given time to look closely at an artwork and write down 10 words that describe what they notice, what they see. And then students are invited to look again and write 10 new words. So hence the looking 10 times 2. The idea being coming up with 20 words, and with a group of students, you can have many words to describe an artwork. This routine, we recommend for students in grades 4 through 12. And then we'll also be combining this with observational sketching. With this, it's a routine for looking closely and sketching what you see, the lines, the shapes, textures. And this, like looking 10 times 2, is recommended for students in grades 4 through 12. So just wanted to kind of introduce the routines that we'll be using today with our close look of Mark Bradford's Pickett's Charge. So if you have your paper and pencil or pen handy, I'd invite for you to get that out now. And we are going to zoom in on Pickett's Charge. So next slide, please. Okay, so I'd invite you to we're going to take about 30 seconds to sketch what you see. my opinion that everyone is an artist. So if you're not comfortable sketching, I'd encourage you to just let that paper touch the pencil, paper touch that pencil, and draw those lines that you see, those textures that you see. Tiffany, what are some of those lines and textures that you're noticing?
I'm noticing a mix of lines and textures. I see some curved lines that are sort of arcing up, and I see several others that are going straight across. I'm also noticing a lot of different colors that are sort of mottled. There's yellow, black, bright blue, red, white, and they're all sort of mixed together.
Oh, thank you for sharing. Yeah, this work as we're zooming in closely with this new perspective, really able to see a lot of those details. All right, so I hope you've been doing a bit of sketching. If we go to the next slide. All right, so what I'd like for you to do now is to write 10 words that describe what you see. These could be some of the things that you noticed while you were sketching. It could be some words to even describe the mood or feeling that you have when looking at this work. And I'd encourage you to, if you can, write one or two of those words in the chat. So either on your paper or in the chat, words that you would use to describe this detail. And Tiffany, I thought it was interesting how you focused on those lines and how they interact with each other. Some are curved, some move in and out of one another. I'm curious on kind of your thoughts. Maybe what one word would you use to describe this work?
I think I would use the word intersections looking at this exact part of the artwork. I'm seeing a few notes from the chat. Some of the words that are being shared are static, bright, bold, and diverse, strings, chaotic. Oh, interesting. Chaotic and then also noisy. Oh, nice. Those two really complement each other. Intersections again, rushed, textured, stuck. That's a very interesting one. Colorful, stringy, disruption.
Mm.
So lots of comments on the colors, but also just so the amount of texture and color feeling sort of chaotic, disruptive.
Absolutely. And I'm seeing also some words to describe like the materials and what it would look like if you were to kind of reach out and touch this artwork, that it might feel like rope. A lot of comments in the chat too that I see are talking about, the direction of those lines, horizontal, arcs. Many of you looking at, the textures. It's crackled. So we have a great group of words here from our first close look. If I could have you advance 2 slides, we're now going to zoom out now. And like we did before, I'd like for you to spend a few moments sketching what you see now from this kind of zoomed out perspective. And I'm curious, Tiffany, if you were to be sketching right now, what would be some of the things that you might focus in on in your sketch?
I think from this perspective, the lines feel a lot stronger. I can really see that sort of curved line, right? That goes right across the middle of the canvas. And it almost feels like a road plowing through. But it still has that sort of blurred, mottled feeling, even zoomed out.
Absolutely. All right, so I'd like for you to take a pause from your sketching now and think up of 10 new words that you would use to describe. So Again, these cannot be words that you used before. And I'd encourage you to kind of really stretch yourself in words that you would use to describe. So we do next slide, please. And then again, if you could start to kind of write those in the chat or write them down on that piece of paper in front of you.
While we're
Um,
waiting, Nicole, one other thing I'm noticing zoomed out is that there does seem to be some kind of a figure behind one of the lines that was too blurred in the close up. So now that we've zoomed out, I'm seeing something that feels a little bit less abstracted. And I'm wondering if others in the audience are noticing that too.
that's good eye, good eye. Be curious to hear what others are noticing. Um, I do see some that are mentioning, railroad tracks. That the work appears even braided from this perspective. Um, what else? Let's see. Oh, an overhead view. So, kind of thinking about a shifted perspective. Thinking about rivers or kind of electrical elements. Absolutely. Yeah, and similar to as Tiffany had mentioned, we have maybe what appears to look like hills, um, maybe some elements that we couldn't see while we were closely looking. It's structured, linear. I'm thinking about kind of a journey as well. What are some
I,
of the things
oh,
that
I
you're noticing in the chat, Tiffany?
I see a word that really pops out for me. The word is indecision. So I think that's a really interesting choice. And when I see that, I think about how this feels so abstracted, but maybe there's some representational elements to that road-like line, that figure in the background. Indecision.
I love
Um,
that.
Cresting wave is another one describing that kind of arc. Layers, horizon, and then also accumulation.
It's a great word. I really like the phrase coming into focus.
Mm.
Uh, Static. So before, when we had that zoomed in perspective, many of you had mentioned kind of chaos, but as we moved out, perhaps a bit more static. Pathways. Oh, or TV static. TV static. My apologies. Okay, these are wonderful words to describe, and I see them still coming through. But again, this exercise is so helpful for students to come up with words to describe. Oftentimes in kind of the galleries or even the classroom, this is a great exercise to use prior to a writing activity with students. So they have all of these wonderful words um, to describe and will help support their learning. All right, well, if we could advance 2 slides, Tiffany will now kind of introduce you a bit more to Pickett's charge.
All right. Thank you, Nicole. And thank you to all of you for sharing your wonderful observations and getting us started. We're looking again at this installation view of the artwork to really give you a sense of the scale of it. Again, if you were standing in the Hirshhorn, this monumental artwork would wrap all the way around our circular building, and each canvas goes from floor to ceiling. This is a really special artwork for us. We commissioned this work from the artist Mark Bradford, meaning we asked him to create this artwork specifically for our building. As you can see, our building has a really unique curved shape, kind of like a donut. We're a big circle with a hole inside. So Mark Bradford created 8 canvases to fill the entire circle, meaning that this is nearly 400 linear feet. It is a truly monumental artwork. To fully experience it, you have to walk you have to take that journey all the way around the circle of the museum. So hopefully some of you will be able to come and see us in DC. This will be up ongoing. And if not, we're really glad to have you here today. If we could advance to the next slide, I'll share a little bit more about the Canvas titles. So these are the 8 canvases, and I am going to go in order from left to right, top to bottom. So kind of like we're reading the pages of a book. And I'll say them slowly, and they'll be put into the chat as well. The first one is Dead Horse. The second one is titled Battle. The next one is titled Two Men. The next one is The Copse of Trees. The next one, this is 5, is The Thunderous Cannonade. 6 is The Man with the Flag. 7 is High Water Mark. And lastly is Witness Tree. These titles are all taken from different aspects of a Civil War battle, same title, Pickett's Charge, and things that are specific to the site of Gettysburg. All right, I believe we have a video to show next. Is that correct, Nicole? Do I have the slides right? So we're going to, yes, okay. We're going to introduce you now to Mark Bradford in a short video where you'll see him talking a little bit more about this work.
I'm an artist that paints with paper. I use, whether it's billboard paper, culled from the streets, it has a use value. Usually the materials that I have some use value in the world. And I begin to take these materials and form what I consider paintings, sculptural paintings. So the materials in Pickett's Charge, the largest images of Pickett's Charge were images that came from the internet and that I sent them to a billboard company. And I told them to make them billboard size. I think I told them I want people to see them from the freeway. So it became pixelated and it became kind of CYMK'd, and that was the main layer. Then there's rope I used underneath to create the line work, and store-bought paper. I would probably say that each one of the canvases has between 5 and 10 layers. The first layer underneath you would see is kind of a fluorescent color paint, and then I would put a string on top, and then I would build it and build it. Usually each layer takes about a week to put on and dry. It's almost like a tree. The tree rings, if you cut it, you can kind of count the layers.
And to Mark Bradford, a really visual introduction, seeing him in our museum space with his work. He created the work in his studio in Los Angeles. It was brought out here on a large truck, really, really large truck, and then installed. And you could see in that video how he's ripping and tearing and pulling apart, making all the final preparations right in our space. Mark Bradford is a contemporary living artist. His process is very much about sort of exploring places, exploring history, asking questions, and he does that through this process of painting with paper. So as you could see in the video, he layers paper, found objects, in this case, using rope and a photo reproduction of another painting, which we'll get to in just a bit. And he rips them, really physically pulling it off, as you could see, tears, bleaches, and burns parts, really sort of distorting the image and abstracting some parts and leaving some other parts in place so that we can still see some bits, asking us to really look more closely and to ask questions. So we have this wonderful quote from him. I am standing in the middle of a question about where we are as a nation. As I shared before, we invited him to create this work specifically for our museum. And there are a couple other things about our museum that are really important besides the shape of the circle. One of those things is that we are located on the National Mall, and the National Mall is visible from the mid portion of this artwork. So if you're standing midway through Pickett's Charge and the Hirshhorn, you can peek through a window and see out to the National Mall. This is really important because the National Mall is the place where many civil rights marches and protests have taken place and continue to take place. So the story doesn't end with the Civil War. The story continues with this continued struggle for justice, these continued civil rights fights and battles that are taking place. So we can see that in conversation with Mark Bradford's work. So that's one important thing. The second piece that's really important is that the Gettysburg Historic Site also has the same circular shape, well, not the same, but a circular shaped building like the Hirshhorns. And Bradford was very excited about this connection. Gettysburg's building houses an 1880s painting of the same title, Pickett's Charge, that is actually a cyclorama, being a circular painting with elements installed inside to make it feel almost like virtual reality. So these two things, our location on the National Mall and our circular shape being similar to that of another historic site that houses this painting, were really, really important to Mark Bradford and the choices that he made in creating this artwork. All right, we can advance to the next slide. Thank you.
All right, so as Tiffany mentioned, Mark Bradford, when he received this commission, is thinking about these conversations. And with this work, Pickett's Charge, was really drawn to the Battle of Gettysburg, and wanting to kind of create a conversation today about how we tell and remember stories. Those stories can often be history. So the Battle of Gettysburg is the subject for the Gettysburg Cyclorama, a Civil War battle fought between July 1st and 3rd in the year 1863 in Adams County, Pennsylvania. This was a turning point of the Civil War. It was also the bloodiest battle of the Civil War. There were an estimated 50,000 casualties. And as part of this battle, Pickett's Charge, it was a very kind of disastrous defeat for the Confederates, and really kind of led to their retreat and the turning point of the Civil War. There were many photographers and artists who kind of memorialized this through film and paint, even sculpture. One such artist, Paul Philip Coteau, if we can go to the next slide, created what is one of maybe the most iconic works. So next slide, please. So here, we're unable to have kind of this 360 view, but here you can get a sense of the kind of the monumentality of this work. Visitors in the 1880s to this cyclorama, as well as many others, would kind of immerse themselves into this painting. And that was this 360-degree view. If we can go to next slide, please. Here you see, this is a ticket to see the Gettysburg Cyclorama. You can see that kind of that round architecture. So as Mark Bradford was thinking about, what type of art should I create, thinking of other round buildings, of which kind of the cyclorama was part. Next slide, please. And here you can see kind of a cross section of one of these cyclorama buildings. And this was really kind of an alternative reality for a visitor of the 1880s. Not only was there the painting, but also fences and brush as well to make it really feel like you were in that space. And Mark Bradford, as he's thinking about what he wants to create, wants to create a work that responds to this, but also kind of responding to the United States today. I'm thinking back to that quote that Tiffany mentioned earlier about standing in the middle of a question about where we are as a nation. And this work is about five years old now, but many of the themes that are brought up are still quite relevant today. Next slide, please. So here you see the National Mall. At this point, the Hirshhorn was not constructed yet. It would be beyond the Washington Monument here at in the background of this photograph. But Mark Bradford wanting to think about those stories, those histories, who's telling that history. Phil Filippo is painting his idea of that event. He looked through photographs and interviewed soldiers who fought in that battle, but was not able to get all kind of the complete story of Pickett's charge, of the Battle of Gettysburg. And so again, these works are in conversation with one another. So I'd like for us now to take a moment to compare and contrast these two works and see them kind of side by side. So if you could go to the next slide, please.
Thank you. All right, so now that we have a little bit more understanding of the source material, where Bradford found his inspiration, the multiple places he found his inspiration, and this source of Pickett's charge painting from 1883, nearly 20 years after the Civil War, that presents a much different perspective, but is also used in Bradford's painting. Blown up and sort of distorted. I think that may have been one of the words we used earlier on. Let's do a compare and contrast. So we're going to look at them side by side. And I'm going to ask everyone to look very closely for how these works are similar. So we're focusing on how they're similar. I'm going to give you about 1 minute to do that. Let your eyes wander from side to side and up and down as you look. And as you notice similarities, please share them in the chat. Nicole, while we're waiting for the chat, I'd like to hear from you. What similarities do you see?
So when I look at these images side by side, I see a lot of the same kind of soldiers represented in both. I also see kind of a landscape, this chaos as well.
Yes, definitely. I definitely can see the soldiers in both, and this landscape, as you say. Movement is another word that's coming up. Definitely you can sense this feeling that things are moving in both. There's a feeling of struggle, dynamic movement. Wonderful. These are wonderful observations. Oh, let's see. Both have a fore, mid, and background focused on people and moving. Wonderful. Great use of art terms there. There's a battle in both. Similar lines. Well, that's interesting. So even though Bradford's version uses literal lines, actual lines, there's still this feeling of lines in the painting from 1883.
I
And
like
you're
this comment about kind of eyes, your eyes are following those lines, following that movement and composition.
That's a great, great observation. I'm going to do one or two more and then we'll move to the next question. The presence of the flag. Yes, interesting. That flag is really prominent and it feels almost maybe like that tear in Bradford's has that feeling of the flag as well. Tumultuous landscape, feeling of smoke. Oh, there is smoke. Yes, 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 yes. And similar use of color. These are great. All right. So we've thought about similarities. I still see so many wonderful comments coming in. Hopefully you can all read them. Let's go to the next question. So now we're going to look for how these works are different. So let your eyes wander again from side to side and up and down and notice the differences. Nicole, would you like to start us out?
Oh, absolutely. With thinking like an artist, I'm thinking about the materials and the mediums both artists are choosing. So I see one that appears to me to look more like a painting, and the other noticing kind of paper, also all of those wonderful lines that look like they've been torn or kind of ripped. I'm also seeing maybe what looks like a bit of rope as well. So again, kind of the difference of medium. I'm also noticing different colors as well.
It's great. Thank you, Nicole. So noticing a more traditional medium with the painting and a little bit more of an experiment in materials and textures with Bradford's work. From the chat, we have a lot of folks who are commenting on the differences in color, that Bradford's work is much more vibrant and just really saturated. Let's see, we have a comment that it looks like the soldiers are being trampled in the first and or being trampled and in the second it's opposite. Okay, so there's some different placement of where the soldiers are that kind of gives us a different sense of what's happening. The textures being very different, and then maybe a feeling of separation in Bradford's work, this feeling that things have been torn apart. Let's see if there's anything. Are you seeing any others, Nicole, that we might call out?
Again, those ones we're thinking about kind of destruction and kind of thinking about the process of kind of ripping and tearing. I like this comment on the parts of the story. Parts of the story are missing in Bradford's work. I find that really interesting. Thinking maybe about taking away. Um, yeah, more raw, full of emotion with the artwork on the right.
Interesting. So a comment on how realistic the 1883 painting feels, a finished canvas versus a very broken and torn, a canvas that maybe was finished but then was pulled apart and sort of destroyed. These are really, really great observations. All right, so next question. What can we learn from the differences? What might we take away from these differences? It's a big question.
Very big question.
Okay. I'm going to share one more comment while we're waiting because I think this may actually answer the question. One of our comments from the chat says an old perspective being shredded, a national myth being debated and revised. That's a really great observation and something for us to think about learning from the differences of these. Certainly, Philip Petau's painting is a very romantic idea of the Civil War, and Bradford presents us with the same imagery from his painting, but really ripped and torn apart in ways that call into question that narrative. All right, let me see. What can we learn from the differences?
I'm seeing in the chat, thinking about those different perspectives. Also, scratching the surface, and there's much more there. I love that kind of that visual imagery of that phrase, especially in relation to Mark Bradford's work. Also, why don't we learn from our mistakes? What can we fill kind of the gaps of history with? These are excellent observations and questions.
Oh, interesting. So there's one comment now about the presentation of the historical event as being very stoic versus this visceral, sort of stark emotional piece. So bringing in some emotions, giving us room to respond. And if you think back to the 8 canvases, one thing that's interesting is that they really move between these calmer blues and sort of peach tones that are, evoking water and trees, and then these battle scenes. So we move from sort of peaceful to chaotic and peaceful to chaotic throughout the 8 canvases, but at the same time, they're all ripped and torn apart. So interesting, the emotions are a really important part. Anything else you're noticing, Nicole, in the chat?
Yeah, I'm thinking about history, maybe what once was considered or appeared clear may need to be revisited, that maybe it kind of appears more hazy, that we need to look more closely at that history. And yeah, even a sense of obligation, as one of you mentioned, to look through those layers and kind of grapple with that haziness. What else are you noticing in the chat, Tiffany?
I think I actually just want to call out the comment about history and what once appeared clear. I think that's a really wonderful lesson for all of us educators to remember that history, we're still learning about history, and there's still so much more to uncover. And so one of the most important things for us to do is to continue to look for those stories so that we can continue to tell more complete stories and gain deeper understandings of the past and the present as well. I do see one more that I'll call out. War leaves scars for all. The use of the word scars is really interesting. I'm thinking about how Bradford's work is scarred, it's ripped, it's burned, it's bleached. And, those choices are maybe sort of a metaphor for those human scars that we have. Okay, last question, which is, what do you wonder about Mark Bradford? Let me start that again. What do you wonder about Mark Bradford's choices? Oh, we have a question. Was the old pieces artist from the Union or the South? That's a great question.
From what I do know, the artist Paul-Philippe Foucault, who's French, although a lot of his work in the United States took place in kind of the north of the United States. He spent a lot of time in Boston. So I think with kind of thinking about this artist as maybe choosing a side, feel a little bit more unclear. He wasn't fighting in this battle. He was kind of merely illustrating it. All right, I'm curious to hear what you wonder about Bradford's choices. I'm also kind of thinking about those similarities and differences, what he chose to omit or how he chose to kind of recreate these works.
I'm not seeing any comments coming in on the chat. I think we had such a barrage of comments before. So I'm gonna ask one more question. Oh, here we go. We do have one. How does he know where to make his tears? That's a great question. I'm not sure that I know the answer to that. I do know that while there were some rips and tears in the work when it arrived at the museum, he went through the galleries once it was installed and physically, pulled apart and made more. He really wants the work to sort of continue to deteriorate in a way. It's been on view for many years now, and will continue to be on view for several more. And that's sort of part of it, that destruction. There's a couple other questions in here. How did he think of using the rope and paper? I'll take that one, and then we'll move on to classroom connections. So, Mark Bradford's a really interesting artist. He got a really late start with his career. Before he became an artist, he actually worked in his mother's hair salon, and so he felt like that was a really creative job as well. But he started to get really inspired by the things he saw around him. And one of the things he most immediately saw around him were the papers that are used for creating permanence in hair. And so he started to sort of play and experiment with those papers, as well as other papers that he was finding in and around his neighborhood in Los Angeles, papers for events, posters, billboards, things that have been left behind. And he started to use those sort of found materials to create this process of painting with paper. You can look back through a lot of his other artwork and see sort of a similar look, even if it's in process, even if it's a very different story that he's telling. All right, let's jump into classroom connections in our last 5 minutes.
All right, so if we could advance 2 slides. All right. So we would love for you to bring this conversation into your classroom. So on the screen, you'll see 2 Hirshhorn created Learning Lab collections. One is a maker project titled Story Layers, where students can create their own story using similar materials to Mark Bradford and kind of rip and tear those materials. And the second is a artist biography on Mark Bradford titled Get to Know Mark Bradford. And this biography presents his life story in a very accessible way. We recommend that this resource be used for upper elementary and middle school, although there can definitely be applications to high school and lower elementary as well. So I believe you've received a document that has links to both of these collections, as well as our website, where you can access higher res images of Mark Bradford's work. We have a few moments left, and I'd like for us to leave with a reflection. So if we could go back 1 slide, please. With this reflection, I'd like for you to think about a new understanding that you have after our time together today. And kind of naming that, and then with it, what you will do, or maybe what you wonder. So I'll give you a few moments to do that. And Tiffany, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but maybe what's a new understanding that you have about Mark Bradford's work, and maybe what do you wonder? What might you do with that?
Maybe I'll share my first understanding, which is, because I've spent so much time with this artwork, but one new understanding I have is how messy history is. And I wonder how I can continue to ask questions about the past and where I can find more information to better inform my understanding of what it means to be an American, and what it means to fully live up to our ideals. How's that?
Oh, that's wonderful. And yeah, kind of, I love how you're thinking about your first kind of interaction with that work. Ideas that I see coming through is, every time we tell the same story, perhaps it ceases to be the same story. great thought. And that's something that Mark Bradford in his work is exploring, those histories and how they're told and how they're remembered. And some are exploring, our observation and helping students in their classroom look closely at art. Let's see, what else are you noticing, Tiffany?
One new understanding I have is that what is written in history is not the full story, and I wonder how the story will change in the future. That's great. That's wonderful. Yes,
Ah,
it's so important. Using layers in storytelling. There are so many different ways that people are thinking about history, so many different perspectives. Thank you, everyone, for
absolutely.
sharing these wonderful, wonderful observations and for taking the time with us to think about how art can be used as a lens to understand history and stories. It's really a great way to get students to see history in different ways and to ask these questions. I know that our time is just about up. But we do have a couple additional resources on teaching about race and the Battle of Gettysburg that I'll ask our moderator to add to the chat. And we thank everyone for joining us and being a part of this session. I think we can advance to our final slide. Yes. If you have, oh, I'm sorry, if you go back one slide. If you have any questions or you'd like to learn more about this or get additional resources, please feel free to contact myself and Nicole. We'd be happy to share with you additional resources or answer any questions. Thank you so much, everyone.
Yes, thank you for joining.